Today we will be talking to Heather Landon. Heather Landon is Director of Documentation at the United Nations in New York. Prior to her current role in the United Nations, she was Chief of Administration in missions in the Sudan and in Kongo and also in Gaza. Prior to this, she worked for the Red Cross and Red Crescent. Heather Landon received a Bachelor in Social Work from the University of Victoria and also a Master's in Public Administration from the University of Victoria. And she also earned a Master's of Science degree in Human Resource Management from the University of Manchester in the United Kingdom. Besides her professional job, Heather Landon also climbed the Mount Kilimanjaro and was on base camp on Mount Everest in Nepal. And we are looking forward to talking to her in the interview. Yeah, Heather, thank you very much for supporting our center. The first question I'm always asking is, do we need leadership and do you need leadership?
Me individually as a person, you mean? Do I need leadership?
As a person in your current position. I mean, you're a director, you're very high up in the United Nations hierarchy. Do you still need a leader?
I think those are two very good questions. One, yes, we need leadership. I think leadership is incredibly important. I think leadership is important at all levels. So the answer to your second question is yes, I need leadership as well. Some of that leadership comes in the form of guidance, but I think we have to remember that leadership comes in two different forms, informal and formal. And consequently, the informal aspect of leadership means that we have an opportunity to learn from others that are perhaps outside our sphere or at a lower level than ourselves. And they have an opportunity to influence their own circle.
So on an informal level, you could say you are led by the people you lead, people in your team or people below you in the hierarchy, and the formal level would be the assistant undersecretaries that are one position high up.
I mean, what I like to think about myself is that I'm an expert at managing experts, and that's what I do. And so consequently, leaders rarely do anything by themselves. They work through and with people. And that's why teammanship is so important and building a team together.
How do you lead personally? When you are flying back to New York tomorrow and you will meet people from your team tomorrow afternoon or on Thursday morning or Wednesday morning, what do you typically do?
Well, I think in order to talk about leadership, you also have to talk about management. And management of people means that you want to give them an opportunity to lead. That's why I like to think about being an expert at managing experts. And consequently, it means that I don't micromanage, that these are individuals who are hugely experienced in their own field. They're translators, editors, very, very experienced people. Far be it from me to give them advice on their area of expertise. But my job is to bring them all together, make sure they have instruments that are tuned, that we all have the same sheet of music, and that we play in the right tune, in the right note. I think that my concept, my definition of leadership is probably very simplistic. I mean, why make it complicated? If you make something more complicated, it doesn't necessarily move the organizational agenda forward. So consequently, I very much like some of the work that Coots and Posner have done, where they did a huge survey of people and asked them what it is they liked in their leaders. And they came across as being very, very basic, very down-to-earth aspects that you would think are akin to working in a sandbox. You know, be honest, don't take other people's toys, don't take credit for work that you haven't done, Think about the people that you're working with. Encourage them, acknowledge them. Think about the big picture. What do you want to be when you grow up? What do you want people to think of you? What legacy do you want to leave behind? And essentially, they're looking for people who are honest and have integrity.
Mm-hmm. I think I will come back to this in one of my later, or several of my later questions actually, but when you use this metaphor of an orchestra, I mean the nice thing with an orchestra when their practice is the conductor is always there. You are leading a division of almost 600 people. You can't be always there for each one of these, but do you have like an open door policy? Do all these people know who you are?
You know, well, yes, they all know who I am. I don't necessarily know who all they are, I must say. But I like to manage through my people. Mm-hmm. And that means the chiefs below me at the D1 level. So each one of them might be managing a staff of anywhere from 50 to 80 people. And consequently, one of the things that I created when I came to the department, which is the Department for General Assembly and Conference Management at the UN, is to ensure that we started to have managerial meetings. Mm-hmm. So we had problem-solving meetings where each of the managers, and I have 8 D1s, came to the meeting with problems that they had in their individual sections. Mm-hmm. And we tried to solve those problems collectively. Or I had brainstorming meetings where I wanted to move forward a change management agenda on various issues and how were we going to do that collectively as a team. So consequently, I think that it's important to work through a team and have them, bringing them on side and having them passing your message down. Do I have an open door policy? Yes. But first of all, they have to work through their hierarchy. The UN is a very hierarchical organization, I will say. And consequently, they have to you have to ensure that the various levels of the organization are respected. So if they work through their supervisors and they're still not happy with the answer that they receive, then yes, they are entitled to come and see me on whatever issue they may have.
I understand that there are problems when preparing a General Assembly or the Security Council's meeting, but for me as a layperson, it seems to be very different problems than the problems you may have had to solve in the peacekeeping missions in Sudan or in Kongo, in Gaza. Does it also make a difference for the way you personally lead, whether you are, say, in combat in very large inverted commas or back home in New York?
You know, it does, and it makes a difference because of the culture of the organization. There's a very different culture in the field than there is at headquarters at the Secretariat in New York. And so consequently, that organizational culture makes you manage differently.
And in what ways, or can you give us one or two examples?
Well, for example, I was just given a project that was halfway through its process, I guess I would say, that if we had to implement it in the field, it would have been done like that, nothing. And this was a documentation process whereby we wanted to change a computer process where the document and how the documents are managed. So the documents going physically or electronically from point A to point B and all the different entities working on the document. And I was the project had been going on for about 3 or 4 years, and I was just brought into it in February to ensure that the project was actually rolled out, because there were a number of different delays. And I, of course, knew nothing about this project from the start, but discovered that there was huge resistance against this project for a number of reasons. One being is that it was quite different from the documentation process they were used to, and consequently, they didn't want to change. They basically didn't want to change because it was going to cause them delays in their work. And they work to a very close timeline, so that these documents have to be edited, translated, and formatted and out. And any delay in that, in terms of learning a new system, even though it's a bit of a slow time right now during this period that we were implementing it, would, in their eyes, would be a detriment to their work. Although ultimately, the organizational goal was for us to be able to bring our 4 offices together. So New York, our office in Geneva, and our office in Vienna, and our office in Nairobi, so that eventually we would be able to share documents and share workload in a way that we can't do right now, because each of these offices are working separately. That issue was too future-oriented for them. They were working in the present with deadlines, and they wanted to meet those deadlines and didn't want any interference. As I said before, working in the field, we would have just simply downed tools for perhaps a day, gotten a new system up and running, moved along, tried it with various different bugs and things, and then improved it. Even though we tried to bring in a process whereby we wanted people to practice on the system and to learn it, they didn't want to spend that kind of time. And that was really underestimated by the people who were running the project initially. So consequently, I did get the project rolled out. We did work through, and are still working through, a number of challenges, but it looks like, fingers crossed, it's a green light.
You've managed these types of change initiatives at various times through your career. What do you typically do when you get involved into a project like this? Are you studying the textbooks and see what the next step will be, or are you more an intuitive person?
No, it depends what the organizational goal is in the change management strategy. And there's been as much written about change management as there has about leadership. And if you hit Google, there's 2 million hits on these topics. And there's some very specific steps that you need to take. But consequently, I think ultimately people have to understand what's in it for them, and how is it going to make their current life better, and how are you going to be able to do your work more efficiently and effectively down the road when you implement this new change.
You've just mentioned the principles of cursus and personal, like honesty. That's a very important leadership principle that helps becoming a better leader or a good leader. Do you think everyone can learn to be a good leader, or do you think there is a large kind of inherited component to it?
No, I think everybody has the opportunity to be a leader, big or small. And I think part of that, particularly in the UN system, there's a tendency to manage upward. People are very conscious of what their superiors think about them and how their work is perceived. And in fact, what I like to talk about is the X theory. You look at it in the sense that you're looking up in one direction. But if you're at a P4 level or a P5 level, you also have to remember that there are people looking up to you as well. And so you have to model the way. You have to walk the talk. You have to do those things so that you ensure that you're a good leadership example for the people beneath you as well at the lower levels. But it's also important to work horizontally to ensure that your peers respect you and want to work with you.
How did you get to these insights? Was it your master's in public administration in Canada, or the master in human resource management you've done in Manchester, or?
I think it's life experience. I'm older than I look, for one thing. So consequently, I think part of what you want to do in your learning is to ensure that you build on the previous experience. And if you're in something like peacekeeping, where you move from peacekeeping mission to peacekeeping mission, you end up taking an example of what you learned in one mission as to this solved this particular problem. So if we add in this new missions culture, if we add in the aspect of the various political ramifications, what answer do we have at the end? And how can we create that answer so that it fits this scenario? And part of my personal motto has been learn, teach, coach, mentor, and never stop. And I think that is incredibly important. You have to be a lifelong learner. So as you move from job to job or challenge to challenge, you have to take what you've learned with you and use that and build on that. I think that teaching is our responsibility, so I'm very cognizant of ensuring that I pass on what I know to my chiefs or their subordinates. And then coaching ensures that we encourage people, that you encourage the heart, that you tell people when they've done something well, but that you also spend time explaining to them how they could do something better. And then mentoring is really our legacy. This is these are the people who will be left behind when we move on to something else. And consequently, you want to ensure that they have advantage of your learning.
But, excuse me, but maybe again, how did you get to this knowledge? Was it formal programs that you participated in, or was it like experiences you made in the field that were so extraordinary that you never forgot them and put them into practice? Or was it other people you learned from?
Well, I think it's a mixture of both. I mean, my parents, first and foremost, were very basic people. My mother was a registered nurse. My father worked in a brewery. But they instilled in me a fine sense of moral certitude and also a very high level of integrity. And I think that plus the aspects of the number of experiences I've had, I've been very fortunate to have. And I agree that, learning theory in the university is always important, and that helped me build a couple of, one in particular, program that we used to teach our administrative people called the SMART program. And I certainly couldn't have done that without the theoretical background that I was provided by.
And you use the background you learned yourself at the universities and
yeah.
Put it into practice, and that helped you learning them.
Yes, and I mean it's a circle, isn't it? It's a cycle.
Can you talk a little bit about other people that may have inspired you? Have you met people at the various missions you've been involved in, or at your time at the Red Cross, Red Crescent?
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned my parents. In my university career, I've met a couple of professors who instilled in me that I could do better and not just skate by. In high school, I was always a student who studying, and then managed to get a decent grade. And they said, why settle for decent when you can do much better than that? So why go for 75 when you can go for 90? Why not go for 100? And these two particular professors that I met at the School of Public Administration in Victoria, British Columbia, would never let me, kept challenging me, would never really let me rest and say, no, you have this in you. You can do better than this. Keep moving forward, keep pressing forward. That, and I think several of my supervisors, in particular in some of these peacekeeping missions, where you really see the importance of decision making and leadership, where some issues are life and death, and where they taught me how to make those kinds of decisions and how to weigh out the pros and cons. And certainly there were those issues in Kongo and in Sudan.
What about your the Secretary General of the UN, your overboss. What's about Ban Ki-moon when you meet him in these larger meetings? Is there anything to learn from people in these high up positions?
I think so. I'm not at the stage where I spend a lot of time meeting with Ban Ki-moon, but I will say that in these larger missions, you focus on what's important. So what's the goal? What do we want to accomplish? And then in these meetings that are very high level, the discussion is kept very high level. And consequently, the detail is left to the frontline staff to work out. So in a sense, you decide where it is you want to be and what's your position in the organization on this particular issue, and you work backwards from there. And once that's achieved, then you have the policy in place.
You said that there are some very basic principles of good leadership and that everyone can learn to be a good leader, but why do we so often see poor leadership, particularly in the political arena or in organizations that are very political and play games rather than try to do their best?
You know, that's a very interesting question, and I think part of the reason for that is the agendas get confused. I think that sometimes people forget the organizational agenda, and perhaps their own personal agenda takes over, whether it's an agenda of power or an agenda of fame. I also think that political agendas can take over and skew the ultimate agenda of moving the organization forward.
And how do you teach the people you lead, or how do you try to overcome this in your teams, in your environment, in the division you are responsible for?
Well, what I like to do is maximize strengths and minimize weaknesses. So when I came to this particular department, as I mentioned, they didn't have managerial meetings to any great degree. And it took me a while to figure out what the strengths were of each of my chiefs, my management chiefs. And once that became very apparent, then to me, then I was able to direct the various tasks towards that particular individual and say, no, you do this really well, so consequently I'd like you to take this challenge on, this project on, and work on that. You, on the other hand, need to do this, and that's how I tend to manage. So I like to have meetings where all the discussion is put on the table, all the opinions are put out there, the pros, the cons. We hopefully come to a consensus, but if we don't, a consensus as a team to move forward, but if we don't, then I have no problem using my level at the hierarchy to say, okay, now we're going to do this.
Which might sometimes also create resistance, or
which indeed sometimes creates resistance. And to those people who do resist, you have to figure out, well, A, why are they resisting? Is it personal? Is it professional? Is it organizational? Is there some reason that we can work through that will bring you over to our side? Or do you just have to suck it up and move forward? Because sometimes you don't like the decision. And nonetheless, I wasn't too impressed with having to take on this particular technological process of which I knew nothing about. But I was told to do it, I did it, and we met the goal.
Do you think most people working for the United Nations in New York at the headquarters are aware that it is a very special organization, or do you think most people do their jobs as, say, administrators, as they would do for just another organization?
No, I think both in New York and in the field, there's a very keen sense of belonging to something larger than themselves. And I think that that's part of the beauty of belonging to something like the UN. It is larger than yourself.
You've probably not seen different organizations from the inside, because I guess the same is true for the Red Cross, Red Crescent. But how does it matter for people's everyday job? So when you are working on a simple task, say a translation of a document, how do you as a leader use this element of giving it a specific meaning? Do you know what I mean?
I think in this particular department, there's a sense of importance on the documents that they work on, whether it's the documents for the General Assembly or the documents for the Security Council. They know and the translators, the editors who work on these documents, the processors, they know that this document has to be absolutely perfect in 6 different languages. And not only does it have to be absolutely perfect in 6 different languages, it actually has to mean the same in 6 different languages. So it has to be concorded exactly. And consequently, that's far more difficult than what one would actually realize to do. And I think they know the level of importance of their work, and they don't just see it as a page of translation. They see it as contributing towards the whole.
From an organizational psychologist's point of view, job meaningfulness is one of the main drivers for job satisfaction. Do you see high levels of job satisfaction among UN staff?
I think you see a higher level of satisfaction of people in the field where they're doing very physically challenging work and every day. And sometimes work that you would think it's impossible to get done, and they get it done. Evacuating people, moving goods, moving troops, etc., etc. I think that there's a huge sense of collective satisfaction around that when those tasks get done. I think the satisfaction at headquarters is perhaps less team-oriented than it is individually oriented, where someone takes great pride in the fact that their piece of translation wasn't corrected to the nth degree, that it was a relatively clean translation, and that there were no errors when it was presented to the General Assembly.
You and your immediate team, are you using elements of team reflexivity? Do you sometimes take time off to reflect on, for example, how General Assembly went? And
no, we don't really have the luxury of taking the time off, I will say. But that's part of what we use our brainstorming meetings for, not just looking at new projects or change management challenges, but also to reflect upon what went well and what didn't go particularly well, and how we would do it better the next time round. So how we build our learning into this kind of triple loop learning that I think is quite important in organizations.
What role do values play in the UN?
Huge. A huge role. I think, and that's challenging because of the different cultures. And you're working with a huge array of different cultures. And values are different in what one culture values, another culture perhaps does not. So one of the interesting things about the UN is that it's a great equalizer in that sense. It respects the culture of the individual, but it also brings a huge culture of its own through the charter, the UN Charter. And consequently, that's how we build our work.
And would you think it's a strong culture in the sense that this unifying culture coming from the Charter transcends across subdivisions, etc., or is it a weak culture in which so many subcultures exist that the main culture is difficult to see?
No, I think it's fairly strong. I think it's a bit siloed in a sense, from one department to another. I don't think we're essentially integrated as a whole as much as we would like to be. But I do think that culture exists very strongly in each of the departments.
During your career, do you think that gender has played a major role? The fact that you are a female leader in I would think in the field in male-dominated areas.
Oh yeah, indeed. Very often I was the only woman in the room. But no, I don't think gender plays much role in the aspect of leadership, quite frankly. I think it plays a role in the aspect of culture, in terms of whether that particular culture that you're working in will accept you as the female leader and the individual that they must deal with. This is another story. But overall, no, I don't see a difference that gender brings to the table in terms of leadership.
And you would think that the culture in the Red Cross or in the UN is a culture that is more open to also accepting female leaders than, say, manufacturing industries cultures?
Well, certainly in the Red Cross movement it is and has been. I think in the UN we've got a way to go, and this is one of Ban Ki-moon's agenda items, is to ensure that there are more women at the senior levels in the organization, and he's doing quite well. He's really pushing hard on this agenda. And in our own department, in the Department for General Assembly and Conference Management, we have a 50-50 balance, so we're quite pleased with that, actually.
But did this happen by accident, or are they kind of internal targets and goals towards...
There's internal targets and goals, yeah. No, it wasn't by accident. And they, as a department, ensured that there were a number of individuals at each level of recruitment whereby there was an equal number of women and men for the final decision to be made.
Do you think the time is ripe for having a UN Secretary General that is female?
Sure, I think so. And we may see that in when Ban Ki-moon leads. He's in his second term of office. So we may easily see that.
I'm crossing fingers, and thank you very much for these insights. Thank you, Heather.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure.